I'm really excited to be here with you both. So I do want to kind of set the context a little bit and I know you're amazing and I know a lot about you, but I would love for you to share a little bit about yourselves. So I would love if each of you could start with kind of a little bit about how you got into data science, the path you took, and then also your favorite data science package. It can be any language, any ability. What is that package that you just love? Like you love it for whatever reason. We want to know what it is.
Yeah, so my path to data science was kind of a little both like jagged and rocky. So I think my path in was through statistics, and I might be kind of in line with the other Allison with two L's in that regard. So I was really into statistics. Like when I did my my graduate work, I was doing psychological research, and I was having to do a lot of statistical analyses, and I learned how to do everything in SAS. And that was kind of fun. Like that was sort of like my level one, like, oh, wow, I can do stuff more than Excel and with macros, because I'd been like kind of trying to do things in like a kind of row-wise data frame like way, but I hadn't quite had those tools. And then I got to Oregon Health and Science University as a professor. And I was like, so let's buy SAS so I can like do statistical analyses. And my boss was like, yeah, like here's the cost of the license. You can pay for it on your own. I use R, and he came from AT&T Bell Labs, which is kind of, like the sort of seed with the S language that, became R. So he was like old school R, like very old school. But that was kind of the impetus for me learning it. And I will say that it was hard. There was like no tidyverse at that time. It was like 2010. And it was really challenging. I had all these books that I kept buying for like, R for this, R for this. R for data science didn't exist, but it was like R for mixed models, R for like, mixed effects modeling, R for like linear regression. And I was trying to like get back to my SAS abilities. And then I just got like really passionate about being able to teach that to people in graduate studies in general, because I was like, why don't we learn this way? This is so much better. And it's more fun. And you can make like data visualizations. Like you can do so much more than what you could do before. So that was my path. So I think like if I had to kind of tie that maybe to my favorite package, I think like one that's a classic that I just love that like I just can't quite explain. I just love Janitor. The Janitor package, like it just does so much like simple basic stuff. And I don't mean simple and basic in the sense of like it's easy to, like code. It's more like stuff that is like real world stuff that I always had to deal with. And I really struggled with it, like being able to find duplicates, like duplicate rows, being able to just change all the variable names to a certain kind of case so that I could work with them easier, because I would always get in my research, I would always get Excel files with like spaces and like punctuation and all these gnarly things, and I would spend so much time trying to work with that. So for me, the Janitor package like just made it so that like I could do like 3 lines of code, and I was like, whoa, like that was amazing. And then I could get to the stuff that I really loved. So for me, like a really great package can sometimes be like the workhorse that it may not necessarily be the end goal and like the pretty thing that you're showing off to people at the end, but it was like it simplified my workflow significantly. And I felt like it kind of like preempted needs that I didn't even know I had sometimes when I'd find a function that they had like put in there. I was like, oh god, brilliant, like I don't have to worry about that anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like Janitor, because when you're learning, you get these really tidy data sets and everything's perfect. And then you get your first real world data set and you're just like, right. Like, Janitor helps make that a little bit easier for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I remember being in the computer lab when I was in graduate school, and I had like done all the stuff in SAS. I knew how to do everything I needed to, and I finally got the data set that I was supposed to analyze for a poster presentation I was like getting ready to develop, and I had like a weekend to do the data analysis, and I was like, I got this. I know exactly what I'm going to do. I imported the data and I was like ready for the analysis, and then I was like, what am I looking at? Like it was just awful. And it was like in the most like the missing values were all like -999 and like all these awful things that were just like I had never even imagined that I would come up against. And I did not get my poster in on time because I was like, what? Like, so that would have saved me a ton of time.
Yeah.
But I have like very, traumatic memories of those kinds of experiences early on. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, Allison Horst, tell us, it sounds like there might be some overlap, but yeah, tell us a little bit about how you ended up in the wonderful world of data science, and maybe your favorite package is janitor, or maybe it's something else.
I will, second janitor as an absolute treasure. It has saved me so much time and energy and frustration. Great choice. I have another one that I'll share. My path closely follows Alison Hill's. That my path getting started in R was rocky and very much out of necessity. I did my whole PhD in Excel and Jump.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jump's the thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But was always really excited about stats and quantitative analyses and math. And when I finished my PhD, the department I was in asked, like, can you teach the statistics and data analysis class that was in R? And I said, yes. And then out of necessity, it was like learning R the day before I was teaching things in R, which pretty rough. I had an awesome TA, Darcy Bradley. I still think about how she like saved me that entire quarter. But I also think it worked out pretty well. Like when you're having to learn something as you're teaching it, it helps you to realize like, oh, this is a thing that's surprisingly challenging. Like, oh, this was frustrating for me, so I expect this to be frustrating for other folks. So I actually think that it wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but it did mean a lot of late nights being like, what is this thing that's happening? And then ended up over the next few years, continued teaching, pretty quickly started to love R for the feeling of like organization it provided. I think more than anything else, I felt really, and I still feel like my work when I was working in other tools felt very haphazard and out of control. And so the feeling of like organization and projects felt really good. And then, once Tidyverse started coming out, I was like, oh, thank you for all of these gifts. And I continue to feel like that, and have been teaching in R for the past decade, and just really love it as a valuable tool for work and publishing and collaboration. Have been really excited to be able to learn and share that with other folks. And I think the reason that I love sharing it is people shouldn't have to feel that path of like frustration and rockiness that we felt, but so many people still feel like that. So it's really awesome that there's so many amazing educators who are trying to just lower barriers and make it easier for people to quickly get these tools so that they can answer questions using data that they care about. So my favorite R package, I think, is in line with Alison Hill's. Mine is usethis. And just a package where I'm like, it doesn't seem flashy, and then every time I use something in usethis, I'm like, this has saved me so much time. Like, I'm just like, thank you, developers and maintainers and contributors, because the amount of just like below the surface workhorse kind of functionality it provides is incredible. So usethis is a hero in my R book.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I discovered usethis pretty late, and I was talking about it with someone, and I was like, I can't believe I've gone this long without using usethis, and they were like, it's literally in the name, like use this. I was like, yep it is. So that's on me.
I think that the thing that I think that usethis is actually a really great example too of a package that kind of maybe kind of specifically R flavored, or is something that exists in R that may not necessarily exist in other ecosystems too, because it's you could just write out all those instructions by hand, and tell you like where to put these files. And, because if you haven't used this before, it's like, you can just kind of say like, I want to create an R package, and it puts all the files in all the right place and names them exactly the way they're supposed to be named. And it gives you like a little, skeleton basically of like a minimum viable package. And it does that for a lot of different things. And I feel like that's like something that, sure, you could document it and you could write it up, but it would be like just the most tedious thing to write. And there's so many different ways that you could get it wrong. And like, why not just like give it to people? And I think for me, like usethis was also just like an inspirational package from the standpoint of like making better products in general. Cause it was like, why, like, it's so much easier to edit something than to create something new. And it's so much easier to like just show people what something looks like, rather than, if you could imagine starting off like a workshop or a class by being like, okay, so we're going to talk a ton about like file structure and what the files need to be named. And there's no real like, this is just how it was made. Like, there's not like any, mental model that can help you understand why it is this way. It just is that way. And you may as well just get to the fun stuff a little bit faster. So I feel like that's like a great, like very R-centric package that I really like.
Yeah, for sure. I'm getting to the fun stuff. So we are kicking off the Palmer Penguin Power Hour because you are two of the three authors of the Palmer Penguin package. And just to context set a little bit, I pulled up, this is a data set that exists in a paper. So let's talk about the starting point. The starting point is a 2014 PLOS One paper titled Ecological Sexual Dimorphism and Environmental Variability Within a Community of Antarctic Penguins. And now we have Palmer penguins, which are these adorable illustrations and a really, truly darling and beloved data package that has definitely taken over, I think, in the R community as a default package. But I also see it quite a bit in the Python community as a default package. So definitely hardest question of the day, why penguins?
I'm going to quote Kristen Gorman here, which is Kristen Gorman is the original collector and first author on that paper of the penguins data, which is everybody loves penguins. Like, they're a pretty non-controversial subject for a data set. And I also think that they are charismatic and have like pretty intuitive pieces like flippers and a bill. So I think it kind of lended itself to a pretty friendly data set.
Okay. Yeah.
There's a fun fact though about that, where when we have a paper published in the R journal, and one of the reviewers did comment that we needed to define what a flipper was. And so I think, Kristen, like if you read our paper, there's like this hilarious clarification, which was like in response to reviewer number 2, which was like, flippers are the appendages that help penguins be able. It was just so funny. It cracked me up. They were like, you need to define flippers for the non-scientific like audience. And we're like, oh, okay, like that, fair. Like, not everyone does know exactly what a flipper is. And we're like, Kristen, how would you define a flipper? We were all like in a meeting, like,
all of this. I mean, how? Like, what's the story? Were you just browsing old issues of PLOS One, and you were like, yes, a data set that I will turn into a like how do we go from? I think you released Palmer Penguins in 2020, so like a 6-year-old paper, all of a sudden is a data set. Like, what? How did that happen?
Yeah, so this is where I can share that I'm so grateful for researchers who openly share their data and make metadata available along with it. So back in, I want to say it was probably 2015, 2016, I was teaching in an environmental science program. So I was looking for environmentally relevant real world data sets. And the U.S. Long-Term Ecological Research Network, which currently has 28 sites, one of which is Palmer Station, makes a whole bunch of their data sets publicly available through the Environmental Data Initiative. So I would spend, and I think this is really relatable to many instructors, like just hours and hours just looking through the repository for data sets that might be useful or interesting for my classes. And I came across this penguin data set, and and was like, oh, this is cool. So I used it in my classes for a couple of years, and then joined Twitter and started seeing more conversations about like, we need a replacement for Iris as a more interesting and relevant real world data set. And I was like, well, this pretty much matches perfectly. And that's where my start was with it. And then there was an interesting Alison Hill recently shared to me the first communication we had about penguins.
So it was at the beginning of the pandemic, I think. Like, so it was really like early 2020 that we started working on the package. But before then, I was gearing up for our studio comp where I was teaching an introduction to tidy models workshop. So that was in January, kind of right before the pandemic kind of lockdown. And so I was preparing for this back in like November, December, and I was messaging with Allison on Slack, and I was like, I need a different data set. I was like, I'm so tired of Ames, Iowa. Like, what do you know of that has like, categorical variables and some numeric variables? And she showed me penguins, and I actually did a blog post on it. And then I was like, I got kind of like cold feet. Like, I didn't mean it like that, but I did actually get cold feet. That wasn't planned. But I was like, I don't know if I can teach with this because I feel like everybody's going to be like needing something more like serious or, something like that. So I was like, it's almost like too fun and too cute. But I was also worried that people would want like more numbers, like more rows, So, so I ended up going with a different data sets for that workshop. But then afterwards, I think Allison and I were still slacking. And then we were like, why don't we make this into like an R package? And then I think she shared something on Twitter that was like, hey, you can use it for this. And I was like, yeah, let's do an R package. Like, it's the beginning of the pandemic. We're all like locked down. Like, we need some joy, So I remember I was like in a different, interesting place in that part of the pandemic. And so Allison and I were like chatting with my daughter in the background because she was home. And I remember Sloan doing like yoga on the bed next to Allison Horst, like showing her yoga moves. And we were plotting about doing Palmer penguins. And then it sort of like unfolded from there where Allison got in touch with Kristen. Kristen was super excited because it was her dissertation research. And then we started meeting kind of more regularly, and I had made our data packages before, so I was like, I can do this, like, and I work at our studio at that point, so I was like, yeah, like no big deal. And then it ended up just like snowballing, and I was like, it became like, Allison, I think we could admit that like we have many Slack conversations where we're like, down with penguins, no more penguins. Like, I've had way too many penguins, like I'll take anything, like where's the puffin?
So many
because
times.
we were just so sick of it. Like, we were like, this is enough. So yeah. we definitely got like penguins overload. So like by the time the package actually got on CRAN, I mean, we were like, like really, really tired. We were like, it's done. Like, like we're not
done.
I'm not touching penguins.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that really ties into this next question. And did you I would say this is like niche fame, right? You own the Palmer Penguins package. It is on CRAN. You are the directly responsible individuals for this data set until you decide to kind of hand it off. Like, did you expect it to, for lack of a better phrase, go viral?
I have been really surprised by the adoption of the penguins. And I mean, it's wild. Like, I see penguins everywhere, including like in my dreams, but like everywhere in data science communities, in R and Python and JavaScript. And it's really like taken on a life of its own, which I think is really cool. I have sometimes thought, like, is the thing that like years from now that I'm gonna be most tied to is like this, 300 row data set about penguins? Which is cool.
We joked about that because Allison and I both had like scientific research careers, and we were like, I think Palmer penguins might be like our most cited like research paper or research product ever, like, and possibly the most impactful too, like in a funny way. Like, if you really think about the number of like people who are learning now with Palmer penguins. And I mean, like, we prepared this talk for the Use R conference this year, and we were kind of reflecting on it, and I got like kind of gooey. I was like, it's kind of weird to think like if my daughter goes to school and starts learning R, like it would probably be with the Palmer Penguins data package. Like everywhere I go, every tutorial I see uses it. And I'm like, this is crazy. Like it really is kind of like, it surprised me. I thought it was just a simple data package. And I thought like, yeah, I mean, it'll be useful. But I kind of thought it was more like geared towards like educators and people who are teaching like, kind of like, intro stats courses with R, and I thought it was kind of a little bit more niche, to be perfectly honest. I was like, but it was fun, and I wanted, like, I would literally take any opportunity to work with Allison Horst. So I was like, okay, like let's do this. But then now it's like this big thing, and you're like, I really didn't see that coming. I honestly didn't.
Yeah, I truly think that like my biggest motivation for making it an R package was like, yeah, this is going to make it easy to use, but like also this means I get to learn how to make a package with Alison Hill. Cool. Let's do it.
So you have plucked this data set out of kind of its environment, right? Its own niche. And like, what do you look for in a data set? What are your strategies? What makes a data set stand out as, oh, this is a good data set?
For me, real world data is pretty valuable for a teaching applied data science that has relevance or interest for learners. That's like something they're like kind of intuitively like, I can understand why this would be interesting to explore these things. With pretty intuitive features, like the variables don't take a whole lecture to explain what those mean and why you would care about them, especially for data science courses where you want to get in the wrangling. And I think characteristics of the data that, particularly for this case, make it like amenable for teaching a bunch of different methods. Like you can do data wrangling with it. You can do a lot of data visualization, but you can also do clustering and regression with it. And there's a Simpson's paradox example, actually a few of them, which we love so much. So I think this one in particular is kind of unique in how many different, especially like intro level data science methods you would want to teach. So it makes it really like widely relevant across like a range of an intro data science course.
The two things that stick out to me are like meaningful rows. Like, there's like, each row is a penguin. Like you can talk about it in plain language and it's like easy, and that's kind of nice. Like, cause sometimes you get like genetic data sets or something like that. And it's like kind of hard to sit there and talk through with somebody who's trying to learn. So like, something where there's like meaningful entities in each row, like a person, a penguin, something that you can talk about and kind of latch onto, because then it's easier to like use words to describe the things that you're seeing. Like if you're doing a scatter plot, every dot is a penguin. If you're doing this kind of analysis, like the degrees of freedom are the number of penguins minus this. It's like it kind of is a little bit easier to talk about. So for me, it's like optimizing for being able to talk about it in like slightly plainer language than some of the more like, kind of advanced data sets that I think a lot of people teach with that require more domain expertise. And then I come at it from teaching data viz for many years. And honestly, being able to see a data set, it's actually really hard in the wild to find a data set that has 3 or more, but not too many factor levels, to be able to teach like coloring or shapes or things like that for the genomes that you're plotting. Like that's actually really, really hard. And when I was in my data viz class, like I really struggled to find good data sets that were like that. So something that you can have on a scatter plot that just has, an X and Y axis and then colors, and then has meaningful separation so that you can see all the 3 colors, like being able to show in one plot, like, hey, if you want to change this color palette from, color brewer pal to like the Beyonce palette, like here's how you do it. And then you can just see it. And there's not a ton of overlapping points, and they're not all like, in a way where then you have to explain like how to spread them out or how to alpha, how to do all these like fancy things that you might normally need to cover at some point in data viz, but you'd like to be able to do color and shape separately. I feel like that's like, for me, the sweet spot was being able to say like, okay, great. And then I can also encourage you to like use it for colors because you're not supposed to do it from, colors for more than like 5 or 6 values of a factor. So every data set that I found, I was always in this like catch-22 of like, oh, there's great separation, but I have to figure out how to like sanitize it for learners. So I'd always have to filter it and say like, okay, just take the first 3 levels of the factor or just do this. So it doesn't require any like pre-processing on that standpoint. So I wish it had been around when I taught data viz, because I think it would have simplified my teaching a lot.
Yeah, it's almost like perfect made, right? It's hard to believe that it's wild caught data and you didn't subset some kind of data to create. So one thing I want to talk about the beauty of it all, and thinking about the documentation, right? Even the way it's organized and laid out, to the data visualizations, to the color palette, to the illustrations. You've both built a reputation for beauty in your data work across the board. I mean, I could talk for an hour about everything you both have done, and kind of this level of beauty and artistic talent and like the aesthetic that you've developed. And this is for data, right? You could theoretically drop a table into a README and provide some descriptions of what we're looking at. So what is the impetus for making data beautiful?
I think that everyone should watch Alison Hill's talks on creating friendly products for data science education. Because that's how I feel about this. I feel like, so often data science feels scary and intimidating and unwelcoming, or just not magical. And it really is, like, and we can make it feel like that. And I think that no time spent making something feel more welcoming or friendly or interesting is ever wasted, especially for folks who maybe haven't like caught the bug for just loving data and working with it.
I totally agree. I think for me, the thing that sort of unlocked my excitement about teaching things was actually being able to control how things look. Because I was like, I have a really strong aesthetic, and I really didn't like how you can have really great materials. You can have you can spend a ton of time on something, and if you don't care about the formatting, or if you don't care about how somebody's interacting with it, it can be completely useless. And for me, being able to kind of exert control over something that is HTML based, that everybody can access, it truly scales. It is better than a workshop. It's better than a class with hand holding. To me, it's this actually scales beyond the person that I'm sitting with, and I can make it something that doesn't stress them out to see. How many people have gone and seen documentation that's a wall of text, and you're trying to parse where the separations are. There's no white space, and things aren't visible, or maybe the color contrast is poor. All of these things are just super, they're not simple because it is CSS. So I don't want to make that sound like it's easy, because it's not. But for me, I feel like that was when I really started being able to feel like I could actually do teaching well in a scalable way, was to be able to say okay, I can actually make this easier to consume for people, and I actually have an opinion on what that needs to look like, and how information needs to flow, and how it needs to look, how the navigation needs to work. So I appreciate that you mentioned the documentation, because Allison and I spent so long agonizing over it and talking about it. That was actually probably I think Palmer Penguins took 2 months to develop technically, from start to finish, and month 1 was just getting the stuff in the package, and also dealing with Tibble drama, we'll call it that. Because we initially made the package just for us, and as every developer knows, once you start making it for other people, you need to kind of adjust your expectations and your code approach. So but then the month 2 was really the documentation, because we were it has to be super awesome. And what we really didn't want, I think I can speak for Allison and I both here, what we really didn't want is to be the keepers of teaching Palmer Penguins. It wasn't something where we wanted to be oh, use our package, and then here's I'll do a workshop with Palmer Penguins to teach you how to do it. We wanted to make it super accessible to anyone, anytime, so that everybody could teach with it. Because our goal was really I don't care if they ever know who we are. They'll probably know Allison Horst because her art is so like, iconic, we'll say. But like the idea was really like, we want to fade. Like we're in the background, but like we just want to make it as easy as possible for people to use and to be able to know exactly what to do, to be able to see opinions on how to do things. And so I think that that's like another, element to making things more accessible and more beautiful, is also just thinking about like, it also makes it more scalable. It makes it more like inclusive for other people to be able to actually use, instead of having the package authors be the ones who are the keepers of all the knowledge and, have the front end, but then on the back end, like they've got all the secrets. That was not the model that we were going for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that comes through so prominently and strongly in the work. So to kind of close things out, I would love to hear, we'll start with Allison Horst. What is something in the world that you are currently curious about?
Oh, so many things. I am curious to see how the use of multiple languages across teams evolves over the next few years, given tools that are coming out to try to make that easier, and to see if that continues to diversify like how people work, or if we're gonna see things channeling more into a single language.
So I'll tell you like the funny answer that popped into my head first that has nothing to do with data science.
Perfect.
Which is, so the other day I popped into a video call and my headset was still attached to my daughter's iPad, and she was watching SpongeBob SquarePants, and they started talking about David Hasselhoff, and I'd really like to know why David Hasselhoff is in SpongeBob SquarePants. And I just remembered when you asked that, I was like, oh right, I was gonna look that up. Like what was that episode? Because I'd really like to understand how that happened. On a data science note, I mean, I think the thing that Allison talked about with the polyglot workflows is really interesting too. I think that we're seeing like an interesting kind of evolution of tools around that. And I think for me, I'm a person that's super excited and curious to see how tools can change how people work and think about their jobs, and even maybe like define their skill set. I think I did this this talk a few years ago where I was talking about data visualization, and it was called like take a sad plot and make it better. And I this one question like resonates with me because I went to Australia and there was this guy in the audience who was like, do you think that learning ggplot2 made you think differently about data visualization? And I was like, absolutely. And then he argued with me back and said like, no, that didn't happen. And I was like, thanks for the question. But I really that stuck with me because I truly think that it can happen, because I've seen it happen. Like every time I've taught people new things, when I've taught them some new tool that they couldn't have even imagined existed, sometimes it changes your entire trajectory and the way that you think about your role. And I think at a higher level, it can change over time, like how we have these data science teams that work together and how we think about them and how they communicate with each other and how they collaborate. And, I think Allison's curiosity was also sort of about like tearing down those walls around languages so that you don't have the R shop and the Python shop, but that kind of change at an organization level really makes me curious, because I love to see tools coming out that kind of push those boundaries and make us think like, sometimes it feels like a small thing. You're like, oh, okay, there's this little tool that just now allows like for these multiple language workflows. But those are kind of like seeds that over time, like other people start building tools on top of, and things start growing. And then pretty soon you can come up with a career or a role that didn't exist several years before. And I think like one that I've been really interested in lately is reading about like the success of DBT, for example, and the like this new, kind of idea of having analytics engineers. But there were people who were doing the same jobs before. They just didn't have like a label necessarily that they identified with. And I think that that's such an interesting like social dynamic, like from the psychological and sociological standpoint. Like how does it come to be that we have these people who are doing these jobs, but there's no label for what their role is yet until sometimes a tool comes along that's like, hey, you like 10 people are all doing these things and it's really hard and we're going to make this simpler. And then now because it's simpler and you have a tool, like, you know, we christen you this new like name of a role, and everybody's like, oh wow, cool. And then they have like a community and camaraderie, and there's conferences, and there's like hashtags, and those kind of things like flourish and grow. So I'm really fascinated at like seeing where our current tool chains and where they're at can change those things like 5-10 years down the road. Like I really love thinking about that. And so if anybody has any similar interests, I will dork out with you about thinking about those things.
Absolutely. I love it. So I would love to know if you could tell us where on the web is the best place to follow your work.
The easiest place is on Twitter at Allison, ALLISON _
Two L's.
2 L's in mine. So that's the easiest place to find me.
Great. And then Alison Hill, where should we find you?
Probably also on Twitter. Preshill is my username, so APRESHILL. That's because my maiden name is Presmanes, which nobody can spell, so it's kind of a little shortened version of it. But yeah, that's probably the best place to keep up with what I'm currently up to. I do have a website that is sadly not frequently updated, but I love it still. So that's apreshill.com.
Love it. Love it. I've been looking forward to this since we scheduled. First of all, even though we're saying goodbye, we coordinated 3 time zones correctly on the first try.
Look at that. Look at that.
Did it.
Look, done. My day doesn't get better.